to Eye on Literature. This is Professor Michael Minassian podcasting from Fort Lauderdale, Florida in Broward County. Today I'll be talking to Dr. Michael Cleary about his poetry and the writing process. Dr. Cleary teaches full-time in the English department on BCC's Central Campus. He grew up in Glens Falls, New York, a city which is profiled in Look magazine's 1944 series, Hometown, USA. His first poem was published over 20 years ago by the Texas Review, and since then his poetry has appeared widely in journals and college anthologies. He's a two-time recipient of the Florida Arts Grant in Poetry and a featured lecturer for the National Endowment for the Humanities. His first book of poetry was entitled Hometown, USA, which was published as the 1992 winner of the American Book Series Award by the San Diego Poets Press. His second book, Halfway Decent Sinners, appeared in 2006 from Custom Words and was the winner of the Palmanac Poetry Award. He lives in Fort Lauderdale with his wife, Carol. Well, Professor Cleary, welcome to today's podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you here. Let's start by talking a little bit about the process of writing poetry. When you sit down to write, do you have a definite idea for a poem, or do you wait for some kind of inspiration?
I have a definite idea, normally a scrap of an idea, literally sometimes scraps of paper. A memory will come to me that I don't understand exactly, or I want to explore and get to the bottom of. Some things come out of newspaper articles. I'll see something that interests me that isn't a personal recollection, but has some sort of explorative intrigue for me. Sometimes it will always come from something written down, at least in a rough draft. A few lines, sometimes a whole page scrawled with just stream of consciousness exploration of that idea. But there's always something solid when I start with. I never understood how anyone can sit down and wait for the inspiration to hit them, although I know they do.
Do you keep a journal of any kind?
I don't.
No. Okay. How about the revision process? What happens when you're, let's say you've got an idea for a poem and you've written some things down. What happens to it from that point on?
Everything with me is revision. I'm either slow or thorough, maybe a little bit of both. I've never written a poem, even a short one, that was less than 100 drafts. I keep the drafts, I number them because I can go back and recollect where I was sometimes 10 drafts ago. I go down a path and explore it, and it doesn't lead anywhere, and then I have to start back from another point. But revision is everything for me, and whoever said the genius is in the revision is somebody I agree with. My first efforts, the first 10 or 20 drafts, are woefully poor. They look like prose that I split up on the page with no musical reason or rhythm, and they're almost embarrassing. I very rarely would let anyone see them, but I need them as a starting point and then go from there. And as with most writers, find that the poem takes you in surprising directions more often than not.
Right. Okay. Let's start a little bit by having you read a poem from your first collection, Hometown, USA. This one's called At Mud Lake in the Morning.
Thank you. An epigraph begins this poem. That's a quote from another source. This is in reference to what I was saying about sometimes seeing something in a newspaper that isn't biographical but sparks an interest. And I'll read the epigraph. It was from the Associated Press, and the byline was from Mud Lake, Idaho. And a portion of that article said the following: 3,000 rabbits were rounded up and clubbed to death Saturday by about 800 men and boys during the rabbit population boom that occurs about every 10 years. At Mud Lake in the morning, boys squint into the ache of sun ricocheting off fresh snow, feel the tingle of violence in their fathers' tense smiles and rough jokes, sense that this is a big and grown-up thing to be proud and fearful on the edge of a man's world, waiting for jackrabbits to be driven Under the nervous bats and clubs they heft and slap into leathered palms, to know the unfamiliar power of pain and death. Too soon the rabbits come, a stampede of darting, dodging terror, as men and boys strike clumsily until they find the fierce and ancient fury in heavy thuds and hollow cracks, and the rabbits start to go down, some sudden and still, smaller than alive, others jerking, scrambling on their sides, changing snow into a crazy quilt of scarlet specks and patches of deeper red. With dusk, deeds grow, bold and large on distant farms, until each boy has vanquished 10 times 10, again and then again, in warrior tales told to hearth-bound mothers washing bloody socks and splattered overalls in their mothers' kitchens. Fathers smoke quietly with measured pride as sisters, hostile and aloof, retreat into wary corners. At night, boys wriggle slowly into sleep, happiness wound tight inside, wonder at the thrill of wood on bone, snow soiled with matted fur and bloody boot prints, wonder where blood goes when the snow melts, wonder how long 10 years will be and how they can stand waiting.
Great. Really nice poem. Well, the poem starts with an epigraph, as you said. So the first question is, what came first, the epigraph or the poem?
The epigraph definitely came first. I've been involved with BB guns, and I grew up in the mountains where I wasn't a great hunter to any degree, but we did things like that, hunted squirrels and birds. And so I knew something about the fun of conquering rather than killing an animal that is perhaps has a bit of difficulty. So I identified a little bit, maybe a guilty pleasure of knowing this thrill that can come with violence, that maybe with adulthood you look back on and aren't too proud about.
Right.
But I identified with what happened rather than the event, than participating in the event myself.
Right. Okay. Is there any point in this poem where you thought you might have been too limited by the epigraph?
I don't think so. I think the opposite is probably true. It freed me to imagine the course of a day. Obviously, the sequence goes from morning to evening, to the boys going to sleep. And I think it freed me up to imagine it. If it had been my own experience, you tend sometimes to be limited by the truth of that experience, even though you often wander outside the reality of what happened. So I think it freed me up to create a scene where mothers were washing clothes,
right,
and sisters were appearing nervous and inferior somehow. Whether those things happened in those places, I don't know, but I wasn't obligated to tell the truth of the incident, just
right,
the truth of the feeling.
It seemed to me, as I read this poem, that there's almost a different mood once the hunt is over, that there's a slight change in the mood of the poem. Did you feel that way when you were writing it? Was that your intention?
It wasn't my intention. I think I see what you're talking about there. It becomes a more universal, sort of the outside looking in at the observation. I think perhaps what you mean is, as I see it, the first part is the action of it, and then after the death, there's a sort of reflection. And I feel myself perhaps stepping back from the poem a little bit more, getting out of the action and watching the responses of the mother, the father, the daughter, the sister.
Yeah. How did you actually arrive at the ending of that poem? Was that all part of your revision process?
All part of the revision process. Right. When I started, I had the epigraph. Actually, I had a fuller article. Of course, I took a piece of it to locate the poem in time and place. But it all came through revision. And the end of that poem has one of those gifts from the writing gods. The line about I was working with this rhythm of wondering this, wondering that, wondering that, and ending up with wondering, what it will be like in 10 years now that they've had the experience. They'll be able to have it again, or have it with their sons. And but the line that just flew into me as a part of that was, wonder where blood goes when the snow melts. And I like the literalness of that, because, you know, the texture of snow, the color of blood, and the rest of it. And that one just came, it was part of this Wonder series. And so that kind of wrapped the poem up nice. But I think I got on the idea of ending with the full circle of the 10-year cycle that the epigraph identified, and then coming back again, that this isn't a one-time only experience. And actually, I did see a PBS thing years later, it must have been 10 years later, of the same situation in Mud Lake, Idaho.
Oh, really?
And so it does occur as a recurring threat.
Someone once said that the end of a poem should always be a surprise. Do you agree with that?
As I agree with most things that have truth in them, up to a point, so I'm equivocating. Was a Frost who said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. I guess I'm a little unsure if I agree with that 100%. Certainly it's not a surprise after you've written as many drafts as I have.
Right.
So perhaps that takes some of the surprise out of it for me. The direction probably in my case is more often the surprise, rather than the actual tying up of the poem.
Right. So it's not really a surprise to you, but it...
I guess after
maybe
many drafts it can't be a surprise anymore. Yes, well, yes, perhaps. Yes. And maybe that surprise happened in draft 50. You know, but it wasn't done yet, and the wording wasn't right, and that gift from the gods maybe hadn't come to me, but I knew it wasn't a surprise anymore that I was going to end on the 10-year cycle concept, and a kid going to sleep thrilled with prospect.
Right. Okay. Let's look at another poem from that same collection. This one is called The Palmer Method, or that's the short title right there. Why don't you read this for us?
Okay. This is called The Palmer Method, Comes to a Catholic School. This was a cursive writing workbook that many people across the country learned their writing from, and certainly I did. And I did go to a Catholic school. The refrain of round, round, up and down comes from the Palmer Method. They would have these expressions that the person directing the worksheets would repeat these expressions. And that was one that I remembered. And so it works its way in the poem. So I guess the listener would have to know why that keeps recurring. Round, round, up and down. The nuns spread a new kind of word, visions of handwriting grace. Round, round, up and down. Fountain pens circled the air, eager for cursive flight. A flock of F's, a murmuration of M's, a gaggle of G's. Round, round, up and down. All the long year long we practiced for perfection. Endless rosaries of O's, scapulars hung with H's, T's like Calvary crosses lined across the page. Round, round, up and down. And when we looked up, girls were busting out all over junior high in fuzzy sweaters and tight skirts, sashaying down the halls to some secret rhythm of bulges, bumps, curves. Round, round, up and down. Boobs, nipples, tits, ass. Boobs, nipples, tits, ass. Our notebooks filled with the wicked strokes. Each word a caress, forbidden wonders smuggled into our beds. Round, round, up and down. Boobs, nipples, tits, ass. Boy flesh bursting at the seams. Prayers of love. Angels writhing through mortal dreams.
Great. Of course, that poem uses humor quite a bit, so it's really a contrast to the first poem that you read. I guess this is based on a real life experience.
Yeah, it is. Probably the majority of my work is based to some degree on biography. And that was a year we went through this Palmer Method, and of course the connection between adolescence and puberty wasn't apparent at the time.
Right.
You know, and I think that's why when I write about the past so much, I was too dumb or too involved with experiences to understand what was happening. And that, when we write about the past, I'm sure it's the same
Right.
with yourself. You're kind of unraveling what was going on. Wasn't that a crazy year? Wasn't that a crazy thing? And things worked out in that poem. When you see it on the page, the repetitions of O's and T's and P's, it's kind of a nice reflection of the Palmer method itself, where you would be writing a whole line of P's, a whole line of T's, a whole line of S's. And so to get those in the poem, it also, of course, were girlish figures emerging, but also the letters themselves were a reflection of the Palmer method. There's one where, I can't remember, it was quite a while ago I wrote that poem, but I can't remember when the selection of the words became so important to me for that reason, but at some point it did. And it just worked just right. Sometimes things have a way of dovetailing perfectly, and I think they dovetail in there as well.
Yeah. Were you surprised by anything in this poem?
Again, one of the things that surprised me is I didn't know how far to take the language that some people might not see as funny and adolescent guy language, the boobs, the nipples, and all that. And I think perhaps at first I may have danced around a little bit, or not had as much, or not had been, maybe perhaps didn't repeat it as often. The repetition becomes a little bit of an echo of the round, round, up and down, and there's kind of this echo of themselves, an echo to an echo to an echo. And so I knew it was right then, and that is in so many things. If it's true, and it doesn't have to appeal to everybody, and I don't expect to please everybody, but adolescence in my mind was filled with girls and filled with puberty, and this poem had to be filled with it as well. So, so I know I marched forward from that point and said, well, this is what it's about, so I have to be, I have to use, I do use that language and not be apologetic about it to the reader.
Sure.
And I hope the humor gets it across to the reader a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think it does. I think you've got just the right amount in there. I imagine, in my own mind, I'm imagining you sitting and writing, and behind you is standing the phantom of a nun with her ruler out, just ready to whack you if you put one too many tit or ass in this poem. So I think you got the right balance there.
Exactly. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Let's turn to your other book of poems, your most recent book, Halfway Decent Sinners. And there's a few poems in here that we might want to pull out. I've marked some pages there, and I'm just going to let you quickly go through and, you've got one already, so go right ahead.
Were you thinking of this one or that one?
The one, I guess I'm fascinated by these nuns also. Yeah, I'm not Catholic, but I remember going to CYO dances for our listeners and watchers, viewers. That was Catholic Youth Organization. There was a Catholic school about a block away from my house, St. Mary's in Dumont, New Jersey, and I used to go to the CYO dances, and the nuns would actually go walk around with rulers to make sure that you weren't too close to your dancing partner. So, anyway.
All right, well, that's fun. My school is called St. Mary's Academy, so in a different place in New York State. This one is called, again, the language, kind of is right out there. It's called Sister Lardass, which makes it a good title if a title achieves the curiosity of the reader, I think. It's, of course, playful, but perhaps it's a little surprising as well. We all were giving ourselves nicknames all through high school, and the nuns had a male name and a female name, and I remember this nun's name, but I don't use it in the poem. I put some other possibilities for it. But the initials were L and A, and she was very hefty. So this is Sister Lardass, and the title goes into the first line. We did an awful lot of repetition and copying and busy work at St. Mary's, along with the Palmer method, things like that, repetition. Sister Lardass, we called her, one of those squat, heavy ones you saw more of than the stalky kind, but also for the letters beginning her names. Sister Louis Alexis, or Lawrence Ann, or such. A nun's amalgamated name to prove she came from a loving father and mother, same as us, not hatched in the convent from a bitter black egg. The first of 3 deep blackboards would be filled when we dumb scriveners entered the room, and before we copied it, up it slid, and she kept on going, page after page, filling our notebooks, sentences piling up into paragraphs, multiplying madly like loaves and fishes from hell. So on tests, we could give it back, word for word for word, for goodness sake, all over again, like opposite-facing mirrors in a barber shop, images repeating themselves to themselves into infinity, and God only knows how or why.
Yeah, you really get the sense of the classroom in this poem, I think. What it was like to be sitting there. It doesn't have to be a Catholic school, certainly. I remember repetition in my elementary school and middle school years, constantly writing and rewriting the same thing over and over again.
Yes, it creates a kind of a desperation. You asked me about the other ones, about a surprise. That one just happens. That image of a barbershop mirrors was a surprise to me.
Right.
I was trying to talk about the endless repetition, and it came to me when a male's in a barbershop. I don't know if beauty parlors do the same thing, but we have that mirror behind you, and you see yourself repeated into infinity. That was a surprise, and it was a nice place to end the poem with God only knows how or why in a religious situation.
Okay, good. Obviously, you've been mining your childhood for good poems. The good thing is your childhood, not somebody else's. And I think, again, you get a real sense of what it was like to grow up in that particular time. I'm not sure if students today have to go through that kind of repetition learning process that you and I did back then.
I hope they don't. I hope they don't. It doesn't accomplish much after multiplication table either.
Right. Have you ever gone back to Glens Falls, and have you had any contact with any one of your teachers or classmates?
Classmates, yes. I have lifelong friends that still visit me in Florida, always have. And I go back each year a lot. My family is still there. My mother is still there. My sister is still in town. Right. So it's at least once a year I do get back. We had this small parochial school only had less than 100 seniors in it. So there was a chance to know a lot of people. And in a smallish town like that, over the years, there's about 10 or 11 people that I'm always in contact with and who come down here. So we were formed by that experience a lot. Right. And I think we still are trying to figure it out, for better or for worse. Many people are still very fervent Catholics, and a number of us are not. But we all went through the same torment from the nuns from time to time. But it created a lot of, as you said, mining that opportunity, that tension and the stress and the power exerted against you and your rebellion against power. There's a lot of the boyish shenanigans in here are clearly rebellions against the repression you felt, both religiously and in a classroom situation. So I always feel I'm grateful for it. I don't know what, I've lost a lot of material. But I didn't have that.
Is the St. Mary's Academy, is it still there?
It's still there, but it only goes up to 8th grade now. And the reason was the nuns were not in, the teaching nuns, sort of have disappeared over time. And when that was a school, the academy went from kindergarten all the way through high school. So you were in that same building your whole academic life if you stayed. And I remember maybe in junior high, the first non-nun who was a teacher, and then there was a second one, and I think there were just 2. And then after I left, and I graduated in '63, there were more lay teachers, and then eventually it just collapsed from the lack of teaching nuns.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and read one more poem. If we could turn to Second Marriage Polka, that would be a nice way to wrap up.
Okay. And I think this perhaps because it illustrates that not everything I write about is about growing up in my childhood. This is a fairly recent poem. On the page, the poem starts off normally from margin to margin, and then there is a stanza that centers itself in the middle, suggesting a kind of a gracefulness on the page because the scene is graceful. And then the following stanza is very ragged. The lines are very, very scattered, and that's to suggest clumsiness. So with that as a prelude, perhaps indicates what I was trying to show about the moment and how sometimes the lines of a poem can be instructive to a reader. Mm-hmm. Second Marriage, Polka. A gathering of clans, German and Irish, strange rememberings, never-lasting vows long ago when how so in love they were with others. Her family claps for a polka. A brother joins her and each cocks a leg, a pause to begin. Then whoosh, a swoop into the first step, hippity-hop, heel and toe, and away they go. One foot chasing the other, gallop to glide, to waltz, to whirl, perfectly together. He watches, amazed, applauds her light-footed steps, so far beyond what he can see now, so perfectly awful. His dull shuffle through slow dances, or worse, his vague commotion struggling against the beat of fast songs, and either way, her, a tar-footed gull stuck with his dopey feet. The accordion wheezes into a slow song. She comes to him, arms open from embrace, on her face the flaxen glow of the gloaming. He lets go, lets himself feel her loveliness grace his clumsy heart, like some fluky penguin astonished with flight. And they move together. He curves into her like shadow. She bends to him like light.
Great, really nice poem. Somehow, when you were reading towards the end of the poem, I was hearing in the back of my mind, round and round, up and it was just, it really kind of fit nicely. There's a lot of motion, I noticed, in all these poems. A lot of action, verbs, a lot of motion going on, and it's really nice the way that poem sort of fits into the end too. It's too bad that people listening or watching can't see the way the poem is arranged on the page, because I think that's really an important point, especially to students who are interested in writing. A lot depends on how you arrange the lines and the words on the page in a poem. It's a very important aspect of it, I think. I guess I don't have to ask you where you got the inspiration for this poem, but I will ask you, were you surprised at anything in this poem?
The bird imagery came to me at some image at some point in the revision process. It starts off with her like a tar-footed gull, being stuck with my dopey feet, and then it ends up with the thing about the like a, geez, I forgot the line myself, the pelican or the penguin line. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that. I mean, it was in the poem,
right,
and it surprised me afterwards that now it works. I can take credit for some parallelism there, that the freedom of a penguin, which of course can't fly, which is a flightless bird, but with my wife's grace and her dancing ability, she could kind of carry me along or bring me into flight with her like some lucky penguin. That was definitely a surprise, and I thought maybe, I always know that the subconscious has a lot to do with suggestiveness in poetry, and that it probably was there at some point. But I didn't set out to do a clumsy bird and a clumsy bird made graceful in the end, or making different birds. Somebody pointed out to me, maybe somebody reviewed the book, mentioned that the dark and the light images at the end, the combination of the darkness with me and the lightness with her, that's a penguin too.
Right.
I hadn't thought of that, and I thought, well, I'll take credit for it, even if it wasn't intentional. Maybe it was subconsciously intentional.
Right. Okay. Right. Well, I think that's all we'll put you through today. Really appreciate your sharing your poetry with us and your comments about poetry and writing. That's the end of today's podcast. This is Professor Michael Minassian reminding you to keep your eye on literature.